And now we're going to discuss major dignities. So what is a dignity? Well, we are sort of going back to school at this point because we're giving planets grades. So what does that mean with as far as predictions are concerned? It means if I'm trying to buy an airplane and the planet representing that sail or airplane, turns out to be maybe not in the best shape, it's probably prudent for me to figure that out. So we're going to give the planet that represents my airplane a grade. And if it's an F, maybe it looks like this. If it's an A, then maybe it looks a lot better. So luckily, programs and websites will figure this out for you. What you're looking at on the screen here is actually from an application to where you can just run this and take a look for the different dignities. So we have several of them that you can see here. One is ruler, or where you live, your home. One is exaltation, which means where everybody loves you. So exalted is the place you go to where everybody just absolutely adores you and everyone's excited to see you and it's a big party the minute you arrive. That is exalted. So that is part 2, which is everyone loves me. So the next one is triplicity. We'll explain that. Then we have term, face, detriment, and fall. Luckily, you don't have to memorize detriment and fall. Detriment and fall are the opposite of ruler and exalted. So as you can see over here, we have a grade. We have a grade. So for example, the moon is going to be a +6. So the moon got an A+. The moon is doing pretty good. And over here with +6, we got Venus. The Venus is doing pretty good as well. Now, if we look at Mercury, Mercury's having a rough time. Mercury's having a rough time. Maybe that's Mercury. Mercury's having a rough time at a -5. So you're kind of wondering, how do we come to all these numbers? Well, let's explain. But before we do that, we can do a website. If you look at Google for AstroFox, you'll see AstroFox is a wonderful site to run your chart. Unfortunately, it doesn't recognize locations. You got to put in your latitude and longitude, but whatever. So we have rulers. It figured it out for us for free. AstroFox is great. And it did essential dignities. So I didn't have to buy a $200-300 program to figure out dignities. It did it all for me. And it does accidental dignities as well. But this is a lot to cover. So today we're just doing rulers and essential dignities, or major dignities today. So let's go over sort of, again, back to school, let's go over sort of what we have for dignities. So the first one that we're going to cover today is going to be ruler. So ruler is where the planet is, where it's at home. Find the graphic. There we go. So sun, for example, if we look at sun, let me get a drawing. So sun, for example, right here is in the sign of Leo. So the sign of Leo is where the sun naturally lives. So that's also called its domicile. So when we look at these charts, for example, you'll notice here's the sun right here, but it says domicile is Venus. What does that mean? That means Venus is where the sun should be. So if you look over here, Venus is in the place of domicile, so it's green. So different people have different scoring for this. So sometimes it's a +5, sometimes it's a +3 or whatever. So we look over here at Venus, and Venus is in its home, and that's a natural habitat. So for example, again, here we have the sun, and it's in its home of Leo. So if we move the sun over to here, now it's not in its home anymore. So the sun being where it's naturally at home is going to give it, most programs, it's going to give it a +5. So we're going to have, is that going to show up? So we're going to have a +5 check mark for the sun. So far the sun is doing great. Now that is called domicile, or in other words, that is the sun, the ruler the ruler of Leo is going to be the sun. So that is the ruler of Leo is going to be the sun. So it's in its own domicile. So we go look over here and we look at domicile. If the sun were in Leo, which it's not, then it would be in its own domicile. It would be green. Right here, Venus is in its own home, and he's green, and he gets a +5. It's going to be good news. But in this case, we have a +5. So what happens if the sun is across the street? Well, unfortunately, the sun across the street is going to be at a bad house. So this is the neighbor's house across the street that nobody really likes. He mows his lawn in a tight Speedo. He's always farting. He's always disgusting. Nobody really likes the guy across the street. And when we're across the street and the bad house across from our home, that is called detriment. So we are now in detriment, because if we were to enter that house, you know, the guy that's always looking at us weird and the Speedo mowing his lawn and stuff, he's not going to be too friendly. So we're in detriment. That's not too good. And in most cases, if you're in detriment, now you're going to be at a -5. So if you were at home, where all your video games are, where all your tarot decks and books are, you'd be +5. Across the street, not so much. You're going to be a -5 because you are indeed in detriment. So the next case is going to be exalted. And this is where everybody just absolutely adores you. Everybody loves you. You're exalted. And exalted are different signs for different planets. So if you look at exaltation right here, the sun is in Libra, and Libra is exalted for Saturn, for example. So if we wanted, not all planets have exaltations, but if we wanted to be exalted, then we would be in someplace different. So again, exalted is going to be a different sign. So Venus, for example, is going to be over here exalted in a Pisces. So you'll see here we have Pisces. And, you know, Venus is not in Pisces, but if it was, then it would be exalted. So we can go to Wikipedia and search for astrology exaltations, and you get a complete list. So again, Venus, if it was in Pisces, would be exalted. So normally when you're exalted, then back to school again, you're going to get a much better grade. Let me move the school up. So back to school again, we're going to get a much better grade because we are exalted. Everyone likes us. When we arrive, the party's there. Again, we have this bigger house now. And so when we move into a sign where we're exalted, then that is going to be very exciting for us, and will naturally give us maybe another +5. So +5 for exalted, maybe +5 for being at home, etc. So now we're exalted, but so what happens if the bad house shows up? Now, if we go across the street again, instead of detriment, if we're exalted now, then we would now be in what's called fall. And fall is going to be probably a -5. Again, different people rate it differently, but if you look at fall, it is going to be across the street from exalted. So exalted across the street is fall. Exalted across from your home is detriment. But either way, if you're at home or you're exalted, then across the street is always going to be bad. So you can see that. If we go back to, so again, we have ruler, which is going to be your home. And then if we look across the street, we're going to be in detriment. So you can see here that we also have an M. That means mutual. In other words, I'm at your house and you're at my house. So you can see the moon is at the house of Mars, and Mars is in the house of the moon. So that is an M in most software apps. and that means mutual house. And so if you're in a mutual house, obviously that's going to be a good thing. We got +5 for him, and then he's not in anything, but he is mutual. So we have a mutual and a mutual here. So I think that's a 1 and a 1. So I think that's when we get this 2, I think. So again, different people have different calculations on this. So let's see. So the next thing we have, again, so we've covered ruler, which is your house. We've covered exalted, which is where everyone loves you. And that's going to be a different place. So that's going to be a different place. Now, usually it's going to be a +5 if you're in the ruler and a +5 if you're exalted. Obviously, these are mutually exclusive. If you're in an exalted place, you're not going to be in the ruler as well. So these are different. These are different. So you can see again, if we go on Wikipedia, you can see exaltations and get a complete list. So if the sun were in Aries, then now it would be exalted, for example. So again, detriment is across the street from ruler. So those are going to have a relationship. And fall is across the street from exalted. So those are going to have a relationship as well. So the next major dignity that we are going to be looking at will be triplicity. And if we go on to the wonderful page, it won't drag, the wonderful Wikipedia, and search for triplicity of astrology, you will learn that it's basically about elements and assignment to elements, and breaks it into 4 groups of elements with 3 each, thus calling it triplicity. And it's also based on sect, etc., etc. Lots of good stuff over here on Wikipedia if you want to read more about it. This is going to score less than, let's say, exaltation. Basically, it's less of a score. And again, we have mutual. So we have Venus is in the wrong triplicity. It's in the triplicity of Saturn, but Saturn is in the triplicity of Venus. So we actually have a mutual sort of respect going on with triplicities. And again, triplicities are not really going to be as big as far as going back to school. Triplicities are not going to be as big of a grade, for example, as something like exaltation or fall or detriment or things like that. So if you look at software, you can sort of hover over a planet and see the triplicity. It also has a lot of great stuff in the software as well. So let's say domicile. So here we are in Cancer. So, you know, the person at home in Cancer is going to be the moon. So moon is going to be the domicile. So moon would be at home here, but he's not here. So he doesn't get that +5. Exaltation. So you see if Jupiter would be here, he would get a +5 for being exalted, but he's not here. I'm sorry. So you can see a lot of these types of things are covered in most of the major programs. You can see the sect, in other words, is it day or night, is in favor, chariot, etc. All this good stuff. We'll explain all that later. You don't need to know half that. But for now, the triplicity, just remember that it's going to be less of a score as far as, you know, where you go and things like that. So you can see that over here as well, that we have the triplicity column. And right here, we don't have any greens, so we don't have anyone in their own triplicity. So next, let's talk about term or bounds. And if you look at term or bounds, if you go to Horary Astrology WordPress, they have a very nice graph and explanation talking about terms and bounds. Terms or bounds, same thing. So terms or bounds are, again, this is a less thing, but it does divide up a sign into 5 unequal chunks. So let's go over here and take a look. So here's terms bounds right here in this little section here. So we'll see that Saturn has just a little chunk. It's not equal like up here. It's not equal like faces, for example, which are 10 degrees each. Saturn has a little small chunk. And if you look over here at Jupiter, he's got a pretty hefty chunk. And then we go to Mercury, it's got a middle chunk. Venus and Mars. So Mars, Venus, and Mercury have sort of equal Jupiter has a bigger chunk and Saturn has a smaller chunk as well. And as we sort of wander along here, it looks like they're kind of equal once we get up here to Gemini. And then when we move into Taurus, it looks like Mars has this little bitty chunk. And then Saturn a little bigger. Jupiter has this massive space, and Venus has this luxurious space up here. So again, you don't have to memorize this. Software will take care of it for you. But if you go to this great Horary Astrology site, they will tell you all about it and all the minute details that you would like to know, and give you graphs and charts as well. So fantastic site. Be sure to check them out. So let's look over here at our stuff, and that would be term or bounds. So as you can see, we get credit because over here, if you look at Venus, Venus has a plus, so it's in its own term, so it's going to get a plus. It also gets a plus because it's in mutual and in its own term. So if you add them all together, and we're again going back to school, he gets a I would say a B plus, not an A. An A would be like plus 10 or something, but he gets a B plus. I'd say he gets a B plus, so he's a plus 6. So if you look at that and just sort of follow along on that, then he gets a plus 6. And that is terms or bounds. So the next thing is faces. Faces are a division of each sign into 3 equal parts. So each has 10 degrees. So here, if we look at Cancer again, we have 10 degrees of Moon, we have 10 degrees of Mercury, and then we have 10 degrees of Venus. And again, as you sort of move across, the planets are different. So you can sort of see the planets getting more different as we sort of move around. Now we have Sun, Mars, Jupiter in Gemini. So for example, Venus is right here. He's going to be in the face, or the 10-degree face of the Sun. So Venus does not get that special thing with face. So if you look at here for face, does not get it. And if you want to know more, for example, about that, we can go back to the wonderful Wikipedia, and we can see all sorts of great information, as always, on Wikipedia. So you can read all about the deacons or the decans and face right here, all sorts of good stuff. So if we go back to our application, so we can see if we hover over the Sun, for example, and you look at the halfway mark where it says decan. So it is in the decan, as you can see, of Venus. So go down here to Mars. He's going to be in the decan of the Moon. So you can see right here we have 1, 2, 3. And again, those are equal. Those are basically equal, 10 degrees each. So that pretty much covers it. We have the major dignities. The ruler, is he at his home, where he has all the video games and he's comfortable and he has his favorite couch? Is he exalted? Where is he at his buddies? Everybody loves him. The buddy's going to call all his friends and say, hey, he's over here. Come check it out. So again, if we're across the street from the ruler, we'll be in detriment at the weird guy's house. If we're exalted and we're a buddy's house where we go across the street, we would be at fall and take a -5 for that. But if we're exalted, we'd be a +5. So, hey, we covered triplicity again. Fantastic. And we can have mutual triplicities as well. So that means that even though we're not in the correct triplicity, our buddy over here is. And so we're going to get some points maybe for that, depending upon if we're looking at our buddy or not. So we'll come back to that later. We have covered term and bounds. Then we covered faces or decans, and now, and detriment or fall comes with ruler and home and exalted. And we come to obviously the final score for how this particular planet is doing. The final score is going to be over here. So different people have different scores. You could be across the street at a bad neighbor at fall, and maybe it wouldn't be a -5, maybe it'd be a -3, or maybe it'd be a -8. I mean, you never know. Different people have different things. So let's look at one final thing here. Let's look at sort of the further dignities of some software applications where let's see if I can expand this. Further dignities of software applications. So over here we're talking about sect. So sect, we'll talk about that in another video. And mutual receptions, like I'm talking about here. Mutual receptions. So that means, again, where the moon is in the house of Mars, and Mars is in the house of the moon. So we have a ruler mutual exception. In other words, the house. Here we have a house exalted swap for the mutual receptions. So mutual receptions are going to be big when we're doing a reading, because if I'm buying a car and the car's in my house and I'm in the car's house, that's good. So we have a mutual reception of one person is at the house of the other person, and the other one is in the triplicity. So now we have, again, have a face. So one is in the ruler and the other one is in the face of the other person. So, you know, a lot of different things we can factor in, but that's basically essential dignities. And hopefully this all makes sense. I know it's complex. When we get into accidental dignities as well, that is pretty complex too. But overall, I mean, it's not that bad. And luckily, most software is going to take care of this for you. So, you know, but it's good to spot, and it's good to sort of know the basics of what we're talking about here. So hopefully you have enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next lesson. And if you are interested in dignities, we have an almost 200-page book, Using Dignities in Astrology by Charles Obert. Almutin Press, how funny. So he talks about the major dignities and tons more. Major dignities start on page 26, and then you can do exaltation and fall on page 34, and then triplicity on page 48. Bounds or terms starts at page 58, and here we have faces or decans starting on page 69, and of course he has extensive charts, etc., etc. Such a great book, and he does plenty of examples too. So you get examples of Henry Miller, Ted Turner, famous people, and then he'll do the chart like you saw on the screen. He will cover that, and so this is so cool. It's such a great book, and I think it was 15 bucks. So it's a steal, and it's nice and big too. You can see how huge this thing is. You look at this compared to, let's say, some other books, and I mean, this is just massive. It's huge. What is the measurement on this thing? Get a ruler. Sorry, I'm obsessed with how big this thing is, but no jokes aside. So we're looking at 11 by 8.5, 8.5 by 11, like a big sheet of paper. It's huge, and it's such a great book. Highly recommended if you're interested on getting more information about this. And as always, I would like to thank my amazing Patreon supporters. They pay basically for the software that you're seeing. So all the special effects, all the stuff that you're seeing on screen is paid for by my gracious and wonderful Patreon supporters. They are Alley Cat, Annie Lemaster, Carolyn Bouchard, Crystal McGinn, Gary Fink, Hot Chocolate, Janet Littler, Jessica Mente, KSW, La Ami, Peter, Richard Zeh, Scott Miller, Shintaro Kuga, and Trina Iavadio. Thank you all for such great support, and I greatly appreciate it. As always, please hit like and subscribe. If you like this video, it gets more traffic to the site, and we can have more people to sort of chat with, hang out with, and get more exposure for stuff that's all about tarot and astrology. And as always, thank you for watching.